Do you think that you've got loads of Skrilla? Because I've got more money than you. Considerably more money than Yao. Loads of money. Now, anyone who doesn't know about Harry Enfield won't understand what that means, but basically, Alphadraft is a series that a service that provides fantasy esports that you can play. You can play there. It doesn't matter if you play the NA contests, the EU contests, such as NA LCS, EU LCS, or ESL ESEA Pro League, now just the ESL Pro League in CSGO, or NA EU Dota 2 tournaments. But you can win prize money there that is equal in all the regions. You can play with people from all the regions there, and all that matters on that service, because it's fantasy, there's no modern business realm that affects it, is just picking the best players, playing the players that will play the best in those tournaments. And you don't have to get worried about some petty nationalistic beef, or my dick's bigger than yours, or keeping up with the Joneses, or whatever metaphor and analogy you prefer, whatever cliche idiom you prefer. Alphadraft, that's where you can win Skrilla by playing fantasy esports. Now then, as a topic, this title, why does NA, North America, have more money than EU? Which is actually nowadays in esports taken to mean Europe and not the European Union. So why does NA have more money than EU? Something that's been a case now for about 2009 onwards. NA has had more money than Europe. Now what's interesting is, before that it didn't. Before then, the majority of the good teams and orgs were in Europe, and the majority of the best sponsors were European, and all the early groundwork was laid by teams like SK Gaming and Adrenaline and Mouse Sports and MPW in getting good budgets together and doing the business side of things, while NA actually lagged quite far behind and only had the one or two businessmen like Torble, for example, from Team 3D, who did anything. And it wasn't until after the CGS era, when everyone had left and sold their franchises, that all the big orgs really got rolling in NA, obviously starting with Evil Geniuses and then others getting involved through StarCraft, League of Legends, Dota 2, now coming into CSGO. But this is a topic that applies to League of Legends as well, because again, in League of Legends, this is a topic that's been very relevant in the off-season, as we've seen all these EU players come out and say what was known for over a year before that, which is, in NA, you get paid more money. There are more opportunities to make money, even for lesser teams, or teams that will never have a chance to compete and win Worlds, but you might get paid a lot more money, even sometimes, than a team who will win European LCS and go to Worlds. So what are the reasons for this? Now, obviously, I'm not a businessman. I'm not an expert in business. Therefore, I can't address all the issues, but I can tell you the issues I've seen and that I've experienced, and that discussing the topic with people over the years, I've been able to see from my own perspective that shows some reason as to why NA is a more valuable region, is a region that has more money you can acquire within it and better sponsors than the European region. And it goes across a number of levels, like the cross-section of the industry, from teams and orgs to the sponsor relationships to fans, to what fans are willing to pay, to what fans are willing to watch, and the viewer base. So first and foremost, a lot of my understanding of this initially was sparked when I used to work for SK Gaming. And I worked under Alex there, the Slash, who is still the managing director or whatever title he has at the moment of SK Gaming, and had been for a number of years, and had been involved in SK Gaming and Turtle Entertainment and ESL for many years before that, probably like a decade or more, well, more than a decade at this point in time. And so I got to talk to him a lot of times and discuss things with him. And then after that, I went to work to Team Acer, who was someone who was working with a budget directly from a certain manufacturer, but then an esports aspect of it. So I got to see these different aspects and talk to them. How is this structured? And first things first, one thing that is key to understand as a principle, I know some people now do understand this, but it's still not quite fully understood enough, is that they told me, put it like this. Let's use an example of Intel. If I want to get an Intel sponsorship, and I'm TSM, and I'm a North American org, and at the same time, you want to get a sponsorship, and you are SK Gaming, and you come from Germany, and you want to get an Intel sponsorship, and I want to get an Intel sponsorship. Now, we're not reaching out to the same person at Intel there, because Intel has different marketing budgets. So TSM, I'm reaching out to Intel America. Notice how I made myself TSM there. I'm reaching out to America there, and I'm going to go to Intel America. I'm going to go to that guy, and I'm going to say, we have an opening here. We'd like to build a relationship with you to be like a head sponsor for us for a season, and this is what we can give you in return, and here's the kind of money we're going to ask for. And the Intel America budget covers all of America, maybe even all of North America. It'll be huge. It'll be a lot of money, and even a fraction of that will be a lot of money that you could have sponsored towards your team, and that for promotional purposes they might even be willing to allocate to your team. But if you're SK Gaming, you're going to end up going to Intel Germany. And that guy is going to have the budget just for the country of Germany. Not all of Europe, I mean, all of Europe can be compared to all of North America or all of the USA. Just Germany, not the UK budget, not the Swedish budget, not the Norwegian budget, not the Polish budget, however much that might be, not the Russian budget. You're just going to only have access to the German budget of Intel, and that's who he's going to work with, and that's what they're going to consider. Is they're going to think of you as a team that, even though you're an international team, they're going to think of you as a team that's going to be based in Germany and what you can offer to their budget in Germany. It's not going to be the same way. So immediately you can see you already have access to a lot less money from some of the big sponsors that we've seen all over the place, plastered all over different teams, but actually are giving different amounts of monies to these teams. And you can see how already the divide between Europe and North America massively skews towards North America's favour there. Then you've got to consider this. Because of that, it's not just that it skews a little bit for the top teams, but the scope of it means there's so much more money in NA in that particular sense that as a result, in League of Legends, for example, we have Challenger and bad LCS teams that have more money overall from sponsorship than some of the top EU orgs have. Likewise, in CSGO, there are NA orgs that pay just as much salary in CSGO as the best orgs in Europe who have the World Championship level teams and the teams that win tournaments and always place top 4. So we can see the disparity there in terms of on the business side. Now, here's the interesting thing to say, is that someone might say, oh, well, that's just complaining, isn't it? That's just people who are the European businessmen and the European teams whining. And, you know, if they really had the same business skill and acumen and understanding that the Alex Garfields and Jacks and all these and Torballs did of the world, then they'd be able to get in there and they'd be able to roll up their skis and they'd be able to get the same share of money. Let me ask you this question then. Think of this thought experiment. If that was the case, then let's spin it on its head and see how it would work. Let's go this way then. If those people in NA just have more skill and are better at developing their teams, etc., then why don't those same NA owners make EU teams? Obviously in games like League of Legends you can't have 2 teams, but in other games you could have multiple teams. Why don't they make separate teams or organizations or secondary teams within their org over in Europe? And why don't they then get all the European sponsors that, remember, if it was about just skill, they'll get a different set of sponsors than their NA sponsors, get all the European sponsors that at the moment these other businessmen apparently aren't skilled enough within this premise or hypothesis to get, rake in all that easy money that's not being picked up at the moment, money just left on the table, dominate the EU market and dominate the NA market and have massive revenue coming in from all regions in the world because they can't. I mean, at the end of the day, there'd even be cases where if there was someone incredibly skilled in NA, but his org wasn't to the level of Cloud9 and the rest, they'd go over to Europe and take advantage of that fruit that hasn't been picked by the EU guys who aren't as good, right? Because it's better to get that when it's all out there already, not enough skill to develop it, than fighting for the same scraps of the NA pie with all the big dogs, right? Doesn't happen. So it shows that there's a natural divide between the regions in that sense. Now then, beyond the budgetary aspects, because that's the old method of esports where you get the money comes top down from the sponsors to the teams and then it goes that way, there's also the aspect of what comes up from the grassroots level, which is the fans, the people who watch the game. Now, first and foremost, you have to say, and I've seen this historically, the NA scene, the NA fan base is more rabid in a couple of senses. First of all, they are much more willing to spend money. Now, first of all, in the sense that they understand in cultural terms, they want to buy shirts and they want to support their player and they want to go to the matches and see them. They're more willing on some of those levels, but they're also more willing in as much as they have the capability to. They have the resources to be more willing to do so. It doesn't matter how willing you are if you don't have the money to do so. So in North America, there's a high standard of living, high amount of money being made, a lot of disposable income, parents who will buy their children things. In Europe, yes, in some of the big European countries, Germany, UK, France, maybe in these countries, Sweden, the Nordic countries, maybe in these ones you can have a similar kind of example of lifestyle and available money and disposable income. But you have to remember, a lot of Europe also is Eastern Europe, or it's countries that aren't doing so well off, or their economy's gone to shit like Greece. These places don't have the same money, even if the player is willing to do so. They can't buy the same shirt for the same amount of money. There's not the same amount of money available to the EU teams in that sense. Then you have to consider that in terms of viewership, which is also going to attenuate how successful the regions are and how much the sponsor dollars are worth, NA fans historically have always been less willing to watch European tournaments than European fans have been willing to watch NA tournaments. EU fans, especially from the early days, have nearly always been willing to stay up really late to watch an NA tournament, to watch in that particular sense, maybe because in Europe, they're already used to watching tournaments in other countries and across other borders. They're not as attached to the idea that they have to be in their region and their time zone. They're naturally attenuated to this aspect. Whereas in North America, if it's all in North America, cool, that's where I am, that's I understand, that's my culture. they're not as interested overall. Now, it's obviously it's not hard and fast rule. I'm talking about total massive demographic numbers to watching the EU side of things. Because again, it's not about talent. We've seen there's been times when EU LCS or EU Counter-Strike was much better than NA, but the numbers for NA were better in some aspect. Now, it doesn't work in CSGO because the numbers obviously aren't there in that particular sense, but you get the point. There's also the aspect as well you have to throw in. The difference is the EU guy, especially someone who's going to school or has a job, can, if he wants to, just stay up later and watch the games in EU, whereas the NA guy, if some of the games are taking place at 10 a.m. in Europe, might not even have a choice. He might be asleep, or he might literally be at work or school, in which case he hasn't got the option necessary to watch those games. So there's also the time aspect that's setting up, in terms of the viewing numbers, why there's going to be a disparity there. Now, finally, what's interesting is, just in terms of who's doing the business in NA, for League of Legends and for CSGO now, because the League of Legends orgs have come into CSGO, and Call of Duty, etc., it's worth pointing out that up until recently, aside from the Call of Duty ones, who I don't know that much about, the League of Legends orgs had become the biggest, the ones from NA anyway, within the League of Legends space. And part of the reason for that is not just the skill of the businessman there, which there clearly was, people like Jack who did a fantastic job, but, I'm talking about Jack from Cloud9 there, but you also have to consider that, unfortunately, a lot of the top EU people, because they came from the old world where building up a team and having a multi-game team and having a limited budget and not letting them salaries get inflated and spending a little bit on this team, a little bit on this, and never going all in on one game in case that game died, and also knowing that your sponsor budget might go back, so you don't want to put the salaries up too much. Coming from this old world meant that a lot of the top EU orgs didn't heavily invest into League of Legends. And then when League of Legends got pumped and got massive, they didn't get to rise with that like tide, as it were, of League of Legends and the success of that game. And so they got overtaken by some League of Legends only orgs like Cloud9, TSM, CLG, Dignitas to some degree. Dignitas wasn't always there, but that League of Legends definitely brought them up with that. So you think of some of the EU orgs, and you had Na'Vi. They got involved very briefly with League of Legends, then just bailed. Never had a proper team there going in Europe trying to get big. Virtus Pro basically never had any proper impact within the world of League of Legends, despite the fact very popular game in the CIS region. Dignitas had an NA team, but they never had an EU team until recently, and the EU team is the one they sold. So doesn't that tell you something right there? Even though some people say the EU team was better than the NA one, like me. NIP, okay, at least they did try to get involved eventually. Their problem was, unfortunately, they got fucked in Challenger a bunch of times. They could never really get involved. But you see, they never had a chance to heavily invest because they were never in LCS. Titan, top European CSGO team, never really had a League of Legends presence properly, never had a top EU team. So you can see there wasn't the same level. And then you talk about teams like Mouse Sports and the others. They'd already dropped off anyway. MTW's dead. SK Gaming has been around, didn't invest quite as much. You can see there's a lot of problems there. There's not been many European teams who've even invested or put in the effort to build it up as much. They've just viewed it as another game and a multi-gaming team. Whereas a lot of the top NA orgs in League of Legends is what they do, and that's what they've built it up from. So you can see there's some of the reasons from my perspective. I've broken down a few different aspects: the sponsor aspect, the org aspect, the fan base aspect, the amounts of monies that are available even, and how well they're doing within that. I don't think it's as clear cut as one region is doing a better job than the other, or the fans in one region are better than the other. I don't think it's as simple as that. It also doesn't tend to matter which players in which region are good in either game, League of Legends or CSGO. But there's some of the reasons from my perspective as to why North America has more money than EU does. And if you want more money, play at Alphadraft. Ching!